South County Dublin, they're already seeing increased activity. I think that will be the first part of the market to recover, and obviously the apartments in the middle of nowhere will be, you know, probably never recover.
Never is a long time. Karl, what's your assessment?
In terms of where I feel there is any stability, I would say non-apartments, second-hand houses in cities.
Are better or worse?
That's the area that I think is safer. Basically, regional areas, outlying areas, in particular apartment units in those areas, is where I feel that the true ongoing risk is. As regards the market in general, a bottom call, that's not what we're in the business of. What I certainly would say is that we watch the yields very closely. And if you see property with a 7 or 8% yield when you can lock in finance at 4.5%, that's a buy. It's just that simple. Having said that, you do have to look around to find those properties. And we're not seeing that in the wider sense. So there probably is more to go. But that doesn't mean that everything falls together or everything rises together. And I think anyone thinking of buying really just has to pick the appropriate property carefully.
What about yields in the sense of rents? What's your sense of that?
That's precisely what I mean, is if you can see a genuine yield around the 7% mark, my belief is that's a buy. Rents are falling. Having said that, I don't believe that rents will fall a further 40%. I don't believe that house prices will go that far either. And the important thing is not to confuse price with cost, because the other element that's happening, and it's already started, is that banks are increasing their margin on lending, and eventually, as they said in the clip, we'll see the ECB increase rates. And that means that a 10% reduction in a purchase price can actually be negated by about a 1.5% increase in the interest rates over time.
Yvonne, when most people talk about this topic, they talk about it as their principal residence, their home. But I want to focus on the buy-to-let market. Yeah. What's your sense of the pain out there, and is there any escape for those people?
There's huge pain out there. We're already seeing repossessions in the High Court of buy-to-let properties. I don't see there being huge activity in the buy-to-let going forward for people who need to borrow finance. But there is evidence out there that people are buying properties. For example, Capella Court in Newbridge, receivers sold it at 1/3 of the original price. The apartments were going for 110,000 and they sold in one weekend, and a significant portion of that was investors. So I think investors with cash, you know, can get good bargains now from the receiverships, but if you need finance, I think it's best to be very careful.
And are there dynamics out there, such as the tax on second homes or other issues that are impacting on the buy-to-let market?
Well, of course, you have the tax on second homes, you have the BER certificate, you have the various rates increases, and I mean, it's just the 2%, or the mortgage interest rate is 2% more than a domestic mortgage, so it is quite prohibitive. You do need to have a lot of equity if you want to go into the buy-to-let.
So you really don't see a pick-up in the buy-to-let?
Not for people who need to borrow a huge amount of the money.
Karl, your area of specialty is mortgage finance. People say, look, even if there's a recovery in the Irish economy, in the job situation, you know, the fact of it is credit is going to be key to the recovery in property prices. What's your view of the availability of credit, and given the negative equity situation, is it just the first-time home buyer market that are going to recover, or is just mortgage finance contracting?
Well, I think credit's relationship is that credit can certainly drive you to a bubble, but it's not going to necessarily cause stability if you have certain amounts of it. We need a market that it makes sense on fundamentals. Credit is hard to get, and frankly, Ivan, that's how it's meant to be. You shouldn't be able to get credit easily. A line of credit for several €100,000 should be difficult, and that's what the banks are doing. They're just applying stringent lending at good margins with the right collateral, and that will actually help the banking system over time. There are, as Yvonne had mentioned, a huge amount of cash buyers out there. Only 1 in 2 properties in this country has a mortgage on it. So I think it's important to remember that not every buyer is necessarily focused on the credit element of it. And again, I think that when you see yields hit 7%, that's the time that you can really start to say whatever about a bottom.
We've seen in the last week all mortgage providers saying that there's going to be a 0.5% increase. Some speculation before any ECB rise or general wholesale rate rise that actually there could be nearer to 1% increase. What's your feel for that?
Well, we actually produced a mortgage market outlook for 2010 earlier in the month, and we said that we expected about 100 basis points or 1% in total over this year, with about a further 50 basis points in 2011. Now, not everyone's going to do that exactly the same way. Some might stagger it, some might do it in one big jump, others might wait until closer to the end of the year. I would certainly say that once assets start to transfer across to NAMA, that the gates are open for everyone to start.
raising rates.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's talk about NAMA. What are you hearing about the prospect of NAMA? It's there to fix the banks. What impact do you think it will have on the property market? Will it create long-term paralysis and overhang of the market? Or is there a feeling, albeit delayed, NAMA will be a turning point?
It's hard to say. They're very quiet on the residential front, but at the IAVI conference there a couple of weeks ago, Alan Ahern seemed to indicate that they wouldn't sit on the properties, that they would put them to the market. Now, whether he was talking about commercial or residential, but it will definitely have a bigger commercial element. But it's sure to have some effect on the residential.
Okay. And finally, you, Karl, what's your view in relation to NAMA? Do you think that will be the defining point as it gets up and running?
I think NAMA will probably save the banks, but I don't think it's necessarily going to save the little person or the person looking for a line of credit from the lender. I think it's really two different things. One is about ensuring the survival of an institution, and another is about allowing people to borrow and buy houses. I don't really see them as related. I think that lending will be tight in the future because loose lending got us here, and a repetition of that isn't the solution.
Karl Deeter, Yvonne Hogan, thank you for joining us on Business Matters. And you pays your money and takes your chances. Certainly there's no guarantee that it is bottom. Still to come, I'm joined in studio by UCD's Colin McCarthy to talk about all things board SNP and more. That's after the break. Welcome back. Last year, the government commissioned UCD economics guru Dr. Colin McCarthy to write a report detailing where savings could be made in an effort to plug the hole in the country's coffers, which then stood at more than 20 billion. In July 2009, Professor McCarthy delivered the report, which included measures as diverse as the closure of the Department of Community, Rural and Gaeltacht Affairs, a cut in social welfare payments, and a revision of the allowance system for TDs and senators. Needless to say, the report provoked outcry, as well as supportive reaction from all corners. 6 months on, we've seen few of these recommendations come to effect. So has Colin McCarthy become disillusioned. He now joins me in studio. Colin, I was fascinated by your report, a menu of 5.3 billion in cuts. I think it changed the whole discourse about the public finances. But now we've had a budget and we've cut 2 billion. I put it to you that the government have been good at the administratively expedient measures, simply cutting welfare and pay rates, but the heavy lifting of getting rid of the quangos, getting value for money, a more commercial approach to procurement, very little seems to have been done there.
Well, I think the first point to be clear on is that the committee that I chaired, and at least 90% of the work was done by the officials in the Department of Finance, not by me, or by the other people on the committee, but that committee was asked to give the government a menu from which to choose, and we recommended a range of cuts that went well beyond what the government's target was for the budget of 2009. And you'll recall from your own time in government, it's a fat lot of use if you need to find sixpence. If you get a recommendation to find sixpence, you need a recommendation to find 2 shillings, and then the politicians can make the political choices. So it was always going to be the case that the government would choose from the range of options that were put to them. On public service reform and on changes in programs and so on, and rationalisation of quangos, some measures have been taken in those areas, including some that have been taken since the budget. And I think the government focused for December on hitting that 4 billion adjustment target. That was the main thing they had to do. That was bound to involve measures dealing with public service payroll, and it was bound to involve measures dealing with social welfare.
But Colin, you're pulling your punches. We both know that Yes Minister
I haven't
is
stopped
true.
punching yet. Hold on, let me punch a little bit more. You know, pay and social welfare, as you know, are nearly 2/3 of the government budget. So the big measures were going to be in those areas. But I think it's very important to understand that the structural adjustments, the public service reform measures, the rationalisations and so on, the government never said, oh, we're never going to do any of these things. And since the budget, a number of those things have been announced and a number of others are being looked at and will continue.
But the point
to
I was trying to make here is that we both know there's an element of truth in Yes Minister.